Welcome to another episode of the Devil's Rest Book Club, where we dive into the details of Christopher Rocky's Sun Eater universe. I am your Arthurian mythological figure, Cameron, and the Cid to my Arthur, the board of my Sivo, is here with me as he is every week. Drew, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. And this week we're going to be covering chapters 23 through 26, the first book of the series, Empire of Silence. We're covering an extra chapter this week just because we had a couple short ones in here, so we wanted to fill it out a little bit better. So we'll be doing an extra one this week. Bonus stuff.
Lots of plot. We're dealing now. We take a little philosophical and asides here and there.
Yeah.
But now the plot is moving. We're not on Delos anymore, baby.
No, on a mesh.
Mesh itself.
Mm-hmm.
So we begin by discussing, as we do every week, what happened at the end of the last episode.
Yeah. So at the end of last episode, we have a sort of mystery that's unfolded here where Hadrian wakes up being tended to and is told that he was dumped in an alleyway, essentially ripped out of cryo without a reason. So we don't know quite yet what's happening, but he doesn't know what's going on. Turns out he's on a planet he's never been on before called a mesh. Some confusing things happening. They start to help him. And amidst, this, he starts to have a growing concern that he will be identified through his drawing of blood, something like this, and he will therefore be traced back to his home world. He may be punished, his mother might be punished as a result. And so he flees, not knowing where he is, when he is, or how he's going to get out of this situation. He sort of flees into the streets, and that's where we leave Hadrian. So we are sort of at a total rock bottom moment last we saw him.
Barely have any idea where we are.
Correct.
We know that we're far away in the galaxy from where we should be on Tukros, too.
Yes.
So we begin chapter 23, Resurrection in Death. So Hadrian, after running away from the clinic, is in an alleyway. And as you can imagine in this sort of situation, he's probably hopped up on adrenaline all night. I mean, he's just woken out of cryonic fugue. Everything must be so disorienting that the thought of sleep, I don't imagine I could sleep in this situation either. So he's scared in an alleyway and is unable to sleep. And we get this indication, as he'd had before, this world is oppressive to him, right?
Yeah.
The environment is oppressive because of the heat. The gravity is oppressive. This world is bearing down on him in his most vulnerable moment. And as he mentioned at the beginning of the last chapter we discussed, chapter 22, Imesh is humid and stinky. The sun, he mentions the fact that the sun looks drastically different in this solar system.
Mm-hmm.
Delos' sun describes a tiny silver coin, where Imesh's is an angry, huge, red, weeping fist in the sky. So we get this totally different image of this solar system in comparison to Delos.
There's an intensity to the world building here that I think is really narratively interesting, separate from just interesting, cool world building stuff. There's a lot of metaphor that's present throughout these chapters about what a mesh is like itself. It's really like this almost rude awakening, sort of cruel environment that he's been thrust into here that is sort of narratively meant to shock us into the reality of kind of what can go wrong when you go out adventuring in space, so to speak. It'd just be good to pay attention to all the details. I'll read through some of them later and in the coming chapters here, but just this sun being an angry, weeping eye and just the whole thing, the gravity, everything's weighing literally heavier on him, as well as metaphorically. It's all important, not just because it's interesting, but because it's metaphorically interesting as well.
Yeah. And it could not be in more stark contrast to where he came from.
Right.
When he's literally on top of the world, physically, and literally and figuratively being the son of the Archon, to going down to being brought the lowest he possibly can be. The water, in comparison to Delos, which was like placid and silvery, is like a sickly green. This feels so much more dirty, even more dirty than the alleyway that Hadrian got caught in.
Right.
In Maidwa. Like, this is a very much a different place.
And there's this description of, these low buildings where they're only a couple stories high. It feels like almost like a medieval fantasy-esque city where you've got essentially small buildings, squalor, intense gravity, all while like looming leadership sort of stares down on the lowly masses is sort of the
Mhm.
feeling. I mean, it feels like a fantasy city to me very strongly when I'm reading through this.
Yeah, piggybacking on that, whereas Maidwath felt like a maybe a little bit more technologically advanced, it still feels like more of a gothic, like
Mm,
European
mm,
city. This feels like I'm getting Pirates of the Caribbean vibes, right? Like tropical,
hmm.
squat, low buildings, and there's still like a castle, like you mentioned,
Yeah,
but this is definitely more tropical. It mentions that the land on the planet of Emesh is small
yeah.
and it's all built on shoals and coral reef and stuff like that, but it's definitely more wild and less polished.
I haven't read A Song of Ice and Fire, but watching it, I almost get a sort of King's Landing, Red Keep, overlooking the poverty underneath it sort of vibe, where you've got just like sort of sprawling poverty underneath everything. And we'll get more into it as the chapters go on, but there's just a inherent cruelty present in just the structure of this planet because of
Yeah.
the physics, the wasting away water. It's just even some of the interactions with the folks from last chapter, they feel like maybe peasants you would interact with in a fantasy setting. They don't feel
Yeah.
like sci-fi characters. So it's sort of present in the whole DNA of the world building here.
We find out that the city that he's in is called Borisivo,
Great name.
and it's a great name. And as you mentioned, what is sitting atop the city looking down upon the squalor that he's currently in is this palace of the Count. It's above the Colosseum. It's on top of a ziggurat. And for those who didn't play Warcraft 3 and didn't play as the undead faction when playing it, a ziggurat is a rectangular steeped tower, sometimes surmounted by a temple. The first reference to a ziggurat is in the late 3rd millennium BC. This is potentially an influence on the biblical story, the Tower of Babel. Ziggurat being referenced potentially in the Tower of Babel is the Great Ziggurat of Ur, which is the center of the Near East during the Sumerian times. Hadrian sees this palace and uses it as a landmark as he begins finding his way towards where he would expect the starport to be. He imagines that because they just dumped him, that they wouldn't do so too far from the starport, right? They
Right.
weren't going to take him across the city and dump him there. They're just going to, they'll
Right.
eject him and dump him out, and then they'll move on about their way. So he imagines it's not too far, but he uses that palace as a landmark as he's moving across. He's incredibly hungry and thirsty as he finds his way there. He mentions the fact that the last time that he ate was literally on cart. So like he hasn't had food or water since that dingy dive bar that we were at like 2 or 3 chapters ago.
And as a reminder, for an undisclosed amount of time ago,
Yeah.
like this could be God knows how long ago the last he ate. So it's interesting, practically speaking, because cryo has got this science fiction thingy going on here where you can sort of be frozen in your state. It may literally have been decades since he's eaten, theoretically.
We know at a bare minimum it's been 13 years. At a bare minimum. It's probably been longer than that. But if we've moved further away from Tukros than we had thought, then it's been at least 13 years, probably more. As he's moving towards the starport, he sees these things he calls ornithons, which are these 6-winged flying feathered snakes that like fish out of the water. The book mentions that they're not venomous in the lexicon, which I think is interesting. But despite everything, it's a hinting at a be careful what you wish for that will become more apparent later, because all he wanted to do was go visit strange lands and meet strange and interesting beasts and creatures, and he's already starting to do that and see that as this is very different than the ecology of Delos. He then finds his way to the starport and thinks to himself, oh crap, I've never chartered a ship for myself before. Like, what am I supposed to do?
Right. He's quite literally like a fish out of water.
Yeah.
And, he's walking into this situation starving and kind of appearing a wreck. I mean, he looks like a homeless person.
Yeah.
Right. Walking into a
Pants
starport.
too big.
Right. So it isn't just that he doesn't know how to do it. It's like, how would you even approach this situation in the first place, given that you have no appearance of any reason to even be in the starport itself?
Yeah. Little cool world building thing. There's like a static field around the starport. So like the weather doesn't enter in or things like that. I thought that was really interesting.
Didn't catch that.
But he's dirty and gross as he walks in, and it's like kind of a reprieve for him from the elements of Imesh.
Mm.
And he revels in that for a moment before a young guard comes up and tells him that he can't be in there, that like he's disturbing the clientele. And then Hadrian, just with the complete lack of self-awareness of his situation, just goes into full Palatine mode. He tries explaining the situation to the guard, but he calls him Sira, which is the honorific that is subordinating. So he's like in his language putting himself, this homeless person is putting himself above this guard, even though he's taller than him. And like the guard is visibly taken aback by the fact that he does. He's like, what are you calling me that for? And then Hadrian goes like full on Palatine Karen, puts his hands on his hips and brings himself to his full height to like show, even though he's dirty and all this stuff, that he's Palatine.
Yeah.
He mentions that he came in on a ship. He doesn't remember that Siena was going to be the last stop. And so he tries to think back the path. What was the path that Dimitri said that we were going to go on? And he can't remember it. So he just says, screw it. This ship should have been coming out of Delos. And the captain's name is Dimitri. The guard doesn't believe him. He like checks the logs and then can't find the Uranusir in there. And like Hadrian starts spelling it out to him. And at that point, he sort of like makes a motion. Two other guards grab Hadrian by the arms and then begin trying to escort him out.
What do you take of the fact at this point that he can't find the ship in the logs? Where are you at mentally as you're reading this section? So it's looked for. Do you take it to be a genuine
Confused.
look? Yeah, right. There's this sense of which like we experience this confusion with Hadrian of like, okay, what could possibly be happening here? Because you would think that it at the very least, if I was getting dumped, they would at least cross through the port and actually dump me. So what is actually happened here? The confusion sort of grows. It isn't just that we have a mystery on our hands. The mystery appears to be getting larger at this point. It's just the sense that I get reading this section.
Yeah, I mean, definitely unsettling. I didn't take it as the guard just like trying to throw him off. I think the guard genuinely checks.
I think he checked.
And then he just writes him off as a crazy person and is like, get this guy out of here.
Right. And, I think it's at this point in the section too that I start to really fully appreciate the problem that Hadrian is in. Mm-hmm. Because, there's some sense in which, you landed here. Okay, let's find record of things. We can piece things back together. But the situation he is in is that he can't even get in the front door to start the conversation to try to resolve the issue. That's how far we've fallen, is that there isn't anything that he can latch onto to begin making progress because people are going to flippantly push him away. This is sort of his initial, first and only real opportunity to try to solve this situation before just the pressing needs of survival force him to focus on immediate concerns rather than trying to solve his situation and get off of planet. So sort of it gives me this hopeless feeling at this point in the story where it's like, oh, we're really about to be really, really stuck if we can't figure out what have happened like very quickly.
And Hadrian, although we may feel that as the reader, that sort of anxiety, and I'm sure Hadrian feels some anxiety too, he has not lost hope yet, right? Mm-hmm. He has not been broken down.
Right. Yep.
And is with the anxiety and the adrenaline he's feeling, he's trying to push through to find some sort of answer before he has to focus on those immediate needs for survival, like you mentioned. He cannot believe that the ship is not in the log. He tries to think about ways that he can sort of retrace his steps. He believes that Dimitri and the crew have to be around here somewhere. So he goes looking for them. And then as he's thinking like this hopeful thought of, okay, if I find somebody in the crew, I can figure out what happened. Crispin's voice comes in his head and mentions that the crew could all be dead. So I thought it was interesting to point out that when the worst case, sort of angel devil on your shoulder a little bit, or, you have your hopeful thought and then you have the negative self-talk comes in. The negative self-talk or the catastrophizing voice in Hadrian's head takes the form of Crispin's voice.
Very interesting. Because, earlier we had a sort of vision of Gibson. We couldn't tell what Gibson was saying, but here we actually hear Crispin's voice in a different way and not in a reassuring way at all. It is a more hopeless, worst case scenario kind of voice that we got.
Which gives us more indication of Hadrian's belief of Crispin's morality again. And to be fair, I think it's unfair based on what we had discussed previously.
I think, also as he's getting dragged off, there's this important mention that maybe they scrapped the the ship. Like maybe the ship didn't come to the port because it's not parked at the port. Maybe the ship is like destroyed or something like that. This idea is thrown into his head as he's being sort of dragged out of the situation.
Yeah. He finds a tree to sit and sort of process and make sense to find the next step as he still has energy to do so before he's going to succumb to hunger and to need for shelter and things like that. And he sits under a tree and he mentions, like Sid Arthur, I sat a long time in the shade of that tree, watching boats wend their way up the canal opposite. And he brings back the case of those plebeians who were rowing on the boats from when he was back on Delos. Row on for home, my lads, row on for home. I'm not seeing a ship by that name. Not the starport then, not the starport. Maybe they scrapped the junker. Sid Arthur, this is the first time we get a mention of Sid Arthur. We don't have a lot of context here, but if you say it out loud, Sid Arthur sounds like Siddhartha.
Yes.
And we get more indication of this that I'll expound upon later, but this is similar to the idea of the Buddha sitting under a tree. We'll get more comparisons to how Hadrian is similar to this mythological character in chapters to come.
As this is happening, we get this sense at the end of if he didn't see a ship by that name, and then there's this idea of maybe the ship was scrapped, then the connection is sort of coming to him. Maybe I need to check elsewhere. Maybe I need to go to a different thing. And so we jump into this new section, and we get this really great section that I think is really great just in terms of the prose and the world building presence. So I'm actually going to read through it. Goes, growing up, there were always stories you see, tales of crews gone missing in the depths of space, their empty ships scudding into ports and into systems on dying warp wakes. Men said it was pirates, the extrasolarians preying on merchant vessels, kidnapping the crews to serve aboard their massive black-masted ships, forcing machines into their flesh to enslave them. I have seen those black ships. I've stalked their hulls. I've seen their deathless armies, machine men hollow and unfeeling. There is truth in those tales. Still other men say it was Cielsen that preyed on the wandering ships, harvesting the crews the way you or I might net a school of fish from the sea. I suspect both are true, and more besides. I suspect that ships disappeared in the throes of Poin, in the interhouse warfare, and the familiar vendettas that typify our empire. I suspect misfortune, mismanagement, mistakes, or perhaps an accident that caused the captain to abandon his vessel. It did not matter what happened, and I am now too old to care. There was always empty ships and dead sailors. As the ancient sea was cruel, so too is that blacker sea, vaster by far, that fills the void between the suns like water. We get this, first of all, exploration of extrasolarians in a very creepy, like, space horror, cyberpunky horror thing that we have going on here about
space machine zombies.
Space machine zombies pulling people out of space, filling them with tech, just creepy crap. I mean, this is like, I think the first true exploration of creepy extrasolarian nonsense that we've gotten. We've had spurs of extrasolarians here, but we have much more exploration here. We've got more about the Cielsen pulling people out of space, maybe. But I think the truth is that the section here is really just, I mean, the prose is amazing. It gives you a sense for the theme that he can present with the fear of space itself as black void, horrible sea thing that I just really appreciate.
Not only that, it's a beautiful way of giving us the possibilities for what could have happened. Because not only is this great world building to understand what possibly could have happened while not giving us an answer, it also gives us an indication of this is also running through Hadrian in the moment's mind of like, okay, was it the Cielsen that got our ship? Was it like extrasolarians? Like it could have been all these different things. It could have been house warfare. You know, like there's a lot of ways that this could have gone down for me to get in this position. We should note the fact that he said, I've seen those black ship, have stalked their hulls. I've seen their deathless armies, machine men hollow and unfeeling. There is truth to those tales. So what? He just drops that in there.
Yeah.
You know, they say that these old pirate stories where they take you and inject you full of machines and you become a mindless zombie. Yeah, that's true.
I love it.
Just sneaks it in there. I mean, and the idea of the Cielsen catching humanity like fish in water is another indication of predator prey. Unsuspecting people out of nowhere get caught up by the Cielsen and devoured. That's terrifying.
Yes. This is one of the coolest parts about this narrative structure is that we don't have to wait to find out that there's truth to the creepiness of the extrasolarians.
Yeah.
He's like, no, guys, for real, this is This is legit. There is some creepy stuff going on with the extrasolarians. It's another one of these things where we get drip fed something interesting that may be to come in the future that we get to get excited about. It's a cool thing. I like it about this structure, so I'm going to keep pointing it out. But it's exciting when it pops
And
up.
something that I totally disregarded and didn't catch on my first read through. Right, I didn't catch this section at all.
Right.
As an audiobook listener, there's this. I'm realizing it upon a reread of Empire of Silence, and I'm sure that I'll have to have this lens as we go on books forward.
Yeah.
But having not known how the series is going and the structure and all this different stuff, I didn't know that when Hadrian, the narrator, is doing the super intense from the end of the story, reading into it about these things, it seems like just a diatribe. You really need to focus more. And that's something, we're 165 pages in to the story so far. And you and I have had conversations on and off camera about, I cannot believe that I missed this on my first read through already. That's a hint on some of the stuff. We're not going to call out specifically anything, but pay careful attention when narrator Hadrian injects himself and does this world building, because there's potential that has impacts down the line. Not everything that he says will. Some of it is just world building for the sake of world building and continuity. Some of it will have direct impact on the story going forward.
What also speaks to when you finish the series eventually, I think this book, the stock of this book goes up after having gone through it before.
Only being through 6 books, the stock is already super high.
Yes. So it's a underappreciated work in the series for sure, and these sections are sort of why, where you're sort of getting extra context. But anyway, we're moving on into searching for the scrapyard.
Yeah, so I wanted to make one more note about something. And he says at the very end of that section that you read, it doesn't matter what happened, and I'm now too old to care. So even at the end of the story, he still has no idea how he ended up on Amesh.
It's confusing. It's unclear. Yeah.
And he doesn't care anymore.
Yeah. It's a big bomb to drop in the middle of this page that, hey, reader, you aren't going to get an answer to this question.
Maybe ever.
And if we're just thinking here as an audience, if we're going to have to find an answer, we're going to probably have to construct one as an audience member, because Hadrian will not tell us, because Hadrian is telling us that we don't know, right? He doesn't know. So another one of these things where the narrator just sort of takes a piece off the board. Sometimes he's like, this is going to happen. And you're like, what? And this time he's like, I'm not going to give you an answer to this because I don't know. It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool that he does it.
But it just lends to the whole idea of complete and utter confusion with what's going on in the situation. But he has a sense of, okay, I guess the next step possibly could be that I could go directly to the hangar bays and figure something out there. So he skulks his way around to the hangars and slips past some lazy guards. He climbs the fence. And even though he's dressed terribly, he pretends like he belongs there. And that gets him pretty far in this situation. Have you seen Andor?
I have not seen Andor. I've heard it's great.
There's this concept in that show, and I'm not spoiling anything. I won't say anything directly. And I don't know if you've taken any IT security courses for companies or anything like that. I have to do it a lot for my job. And they talk about like social engineering and things like that, and ways to get into how people who aren't allowed in get into buildings and things like that. It's as simple as like somebody leaving the door open, like holding the door open for you, even though the person's not allowed in or whatever. There's a level of, if you act like you belong there, then most people are not going to stop and question you.
Yes.
And Hadrian is taking advantage of that in this situation, despite the fact that he looks like a vagrant.
It requires a couple of things, right? There's some pretty powerful psychology playing into it. Number one, there is a sense of, innate human cooperation that a lot of us have, where holding the door open is, our instinct is to be polite, not to question the person that's coming. That is truly our instinct. And secondarily, there's a personality trait that's associated with assertiveness, which would suggest that you actually need a certain prerequisite personality level or deliberate skill and practice to be assertive enough to confront someone in a situation where they might actually be going somewhere that they're not supposed to be. Because the idea of just holding the door open is very casual. the idea of confronting someone trying to come into your building that is not supposed to be there is like a 8 out of 10 conflict in terms of emotional intensity for most people. And therefore, even if they have a weird suspicion, they don't have the requisite assertiveness to put themselves in that confrontational of a situation. It's very scary, actually. A lot of things going on. In addition, you've got psychology around conformity. There's a sense in which people doing similar things, people tend to do them. There's this whole experiment with the turning people around in an elevator thing, where if you walk into an elevator, everyone's facing the wrong way, people tend to turn around and face the wrong way. There's a whole bunch of psychology around conformity and stuff like this. That's
weird.
It's really weird and strange, but it's the way that we behave. And so there's actually a real thing you could get away with. If you act like you belong, even if certain things genuinely don't fit like the way you appear, most people really won't confront you, because they don't have the requisite personality or training to do it.
We only recommend that you do this in situations that are fun and are not evil. Do not use this for evil. Do it to crash a wedding maybe and make some new friends. Do not do this to steal trade secrets from companies and stuff like that. We do not endorse that by any stretch of the imagination.
Don't tell them that the Devil's Rest Book Club sent you.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that'll go well. So he checks on some hangar bays and keeps looking in to try and find the Uranus here, and he is unable to find it. He checks like 4 or 5 of them, continues, and then he finally gets stopped after a while by a bearded, squat man whose name is Skag. Now, we've already gotten an indication about the gravity on Imesh, right? That it pulls Hadrian lower and it's making him more tired.
Yeah.
But we're seeing it in the people here, because all the people that he's about to meet are like squat, short. They're like space dwarves, right? Like this whole series, like everybody that we're about to talk about in this scene feels like a space dwarf to me. This bald, bearded, squat man bumps into him and asks him what he's up to.
Even if the picture in my head isn't shortish dwarf, it's this compacted, just thick, like lineman looking person of just imagining huge forearms, broad shoulders, just like you took a muscular dude and just squished them down and they're just this block of muscle. It's kind of what
so, and we've already gotten an indication in the world about like people that work in the belt, that they have, people are impacted by their environment. Right? That's a theme throughout a lot of science fiction. Dune has that. Have you seen The Expanse or read the books?
I have it on my shelf. I am very excited to read it because I've heard there is this element very prevalent in The Expanse. Yes.
So, I mean, if you imagine, even astronauts that spend time on the International Space Station when they get back to Earth are so disoriented. They've lost muscle mass. Some of them will just faint while standing up because, like, the fact that their gravity is impacting them so differently. Yeah. And you can imagine that if you're even astronauts on the International Space Station being impacted by gravity in that way, imagine growing up in 0G, or imagine growing up on the moon where the gravity is way lower than it is on Earth, right? You're going to get different physiological aspects that emerge as people grow up in that environment. And so what we're getting an indication here of is because the environment is more oppressive and stronger gravity than Delos, that the people are shorter and broader and more muscular because they have to bear the weight of gravity all the time.
We have a snapshot of the world right now that we're on, Imesh, but when we're thinking of the Solan Empire, the world of the Sun Eater, we have to remember that there's large spans of time passing. There are generation after generation after generation of people solely existing on these planets, and so you can imagine that not only is the gravity, the conditions affecting the person that is there already, but what kind of effects would that have on the development and evolutionary cycles, how people succeed and behave and propagate based on their genetic advantages that they have as a result of their environment. You would really see, especially as generations compound, really vast differences. Even past the first generation, they would just get more severe as time goes on.
Yeah. So he bumps into this guy, Skag, who asks him what he's up to. Hadrian tries to defuse the situation again, saying he's looking for a ship. And then Skag yells out to another tough named Boar, who comes over and whose skin is red and peeling. I couldn't figure out anything about the red peeling skin. He mentions that it's not like sunburn, but we're not really sure what it is.
There's a brief mention that he questions to himself. He thinks it looks like some kind of scarring potentially from an old illness that he had. Yeah, this is sort of the thought that is brought up to. It doesn't look like it's a present problem, but it looks like it was some previous condition that had like sort of scarred over. And maybe in the same way that, if someone had severe acne, you might see some kind of scarring or something like that. But this sounds much more intense than something like that. Like someone
and more recent than like years left over.
Yeah.
Hadrian's trying to back out and defuse the situation, get out of it, and just try and leave. But then he sees his ring, and he knows in that moment that these are the people that were involved in dumping him, because there's no other way that they'd have that ring, because that ring was on his finger and burned into his flesh. So he then starts a fight and then just tries to get his ring back. He ends up getting the better of some of these two guys, but then they call for more help, and then more like 7 or 8 people emerge, all around the same size. You can imagine they're all part of the same crew. Hadrian gets clocked. He gets up. He spits blood. He's learning from his situation in the back alley in Maidwa. This is a very different situation. He's learned from that experience. He knows when to fight and when not to fight. In comparison, as he's fighting, he's like, hey, look, literally all I want is my handwritten letter and my shoes. I don't want anything else. But he's not mentioned the fact he also wants the ring too, right? But even though he's learned from his previous experience, he's too slow, he's too hungry, and the weight of gravity is too heavy on him as he's trying to get the better of these guys. But he does get the better of one of them, and he armbars the guy. He basically like sort of flying armbars him, or uses leverage to essentially break the guy's arm, at which moment he takes the ring from him. At that point, a woman shows up, and her crew, that's the moment the crew moves in, is when this woman, Hila or Gilda or somebody, shows up. The woman diffuses the situation a bit and says, hey, back off, this is over. And they're like, he just broke Boar's arm. Like, come on, let's beat the crap out of this guy. Hadrian tries to play it cool in the situation, saying, I know that it was y'all that pulled me from the ship, and you don't want the cops knowing that it was y'all that did this, because presumably this is illegal to do that. He knows that he's bluffing, and he mentions that violence, like escalation in violence, is sitting over his head like the sword of Damocles. So the sword of Damocles is a reference to a Greek morality story on how being a king or being in power means constant anxiety and the threat of death, where essentially Damocles becomes king, basically has complained about the power structure, and the king makes him king, but puts a sword like right above his head at every moment that he is king, whether it's a feast or whatever. He has a sword like a hair's breadth away from dropping and murdering him and killing him, to demonstrate the idea that the royals that are in power, even though that they may have nice fancy dinners and all this different stuff, Damocles realizes that he can only think about the sword. That's the only thing he's thinking about. And so for Hadrian in this situation, having been in that situation in Maidwa, he knows that violence in this case is going to escalate. And so he feels that tension, that anxiety of, this is the only play that I have, and I know that I should do it, but I shouldn't push this too much. Otherwise, this is going to end badly for me, worse than it did then. The woman says that the ship has already been moved on, and then Hadrian calls her out and basically says, you just proved that you were part of it, and you didn't even know. She's like, oh, fuck you, dude. He asks for his effects, and they just like laugh at him. It's like, who are you, Prince of Jad? Like, who's this guy asking for his effects?
It's important, I think, to mention that a couple times in this chapter and in future ones, the language that Hadrian uses is important. Okay. Mm-hmm. There's this emphasis in this story about the importance of language, and it's really starting to come to a head here as he tries to communicate with people that are very different from him, is that he's very easily noted out as someone who does not fit in because he doesn't communicate well. It's the same language. He's speaking to them in language they understand, but the words he's using separates him and creates confusion. So this theme will grow over the course of the book, and it'll be present just in a few chapters here as well. But I think it's just important to put a pin in that and take note of it, is that there's a lot of crosstalk here because of language differences. It's an importance in the book, not just when we're speaking different languages, but when we're just communicating with people of different classes as well.
Now that Hadrian has gotten the better of them and basically has gotten them to prove that they were involved and did this crime, he sort of has a leg up. The woman doesn't want to deal with the headache that would be involved with dealing with the cops or anything like that. So he asks if they have the letter, like if they could have found the handwritten note. and they joke like, "Oh, is it a girlfriend? You note from your girlfriend, love note." And they mentioned that they threw everything away, and the woman's like, "Leave now or else," essentially. And he leaves. He backs away slowly, and he doesn't like turn his back to them as he leaves this situation, and that ends chapter 23.
So chapter 24 is interesting because it's short. It's barely
The
a few
shortest
pages.
chapter in the book, I think, so far.
I think I could literally read it right now. So I may actually do that because...
No, let's not.
Well, I want to read this first section because I think it's
Yeah.
important. This first section goes, 3 days and nights have passed since I put pen to vellum, which is, if I'm remembering correctly, is the thing he's actually recording the account on, right? So it's recorded in this way. Long I have pondered how to proceed, how best to relate those days and years lost to the streets of Borisevo. They say that when he was a boy, the Prince Siddhartha was kept in a pleasure palace by his father's faithful archon, isolated from death, disease, and poverty, for Avate had prophesied that he should see the ugliness of the world. Siddhartha would renounce his father's throne and become a preacher himself. I had always wondered at this, for I had grown up in a palace myself, and I knew of poverty and sickness, and had my own brushes with death, first with my grandmother, then later with Uncle Lucian had died in his shuttle crash. I could not understand how Arthur had been so blind. I understood it now. Just as there is a difference between the news of a distant planet's destruction of the bloody death of a Colosseum slave, it is one thing to know there is poverty and illness, and another to walk among the poor and suffering. Often I saw beggars covered in black sores and peeling skin beseeching the chantry for deliverance not from evil, but from sickness. The rot was rampant in the city, the gift from some alien animalcule very like a bacterium. It blackened skin and wasted flesh and hardened limbs and lungs. The city prefects piled bodies in squares and burned them, and the smoke carried votive lanterns to a heaven that seemed deaf to all prayer. My own palatine blood defended me, but there was no defense from the horror of it. This is one of the most, I think, visceral images that's like kind of burned in my brain from this book, actually, is like this, as I was reading this feeling of like him walking through the streets unscathed by a plague that is just ravaging everything around him is very visceral to me for some reason about this book, is that there's this experience that he gets here. There's very core, I think, and will be core to him moving forward. This experience, I think, really changed him. And I think that's partly why narrator at the start of this tells us he sort of struggles with how to write this section of the story. Like, I don't know actually how to put this to a paper, so to speak. I think this also partly reveals maybe what happened to the guy in the previous chapter. So there's a sense of the scarring potentially from this rot that is going on and plaguing Borisevo. So there's just horrible things that he is learning through experience, what he thought he previously intellectually knew, that I think is teaching us that you can't really truly intellectually understand some things in the way that we have present in earlier chapters about the fact that you can't really understand a genocide from afar. I think this is similar. You can't understand poverty and sickness and terror from afar either. So he's experiencing that for the first real time here.
And it's cool how Rocchio uses this imagined lore to tell that as well. Because now we get a confirmation essentially that Siddhartha is this amalgamation of Siddhartha Buddha and, or Siddhartha Gautama and King Arthur in this chapter. The analogy of the fact that Siddhartha was kept in a pleasure palace, right? Siddhartha was a noble that descended into the people and then experienced that. And Hadrian even talks about the fact that I never understood why he couldn't have conceptually understood it until he went in, until I did the same thing and experienced it, like you said.
Yes.
It sort of hammers home that idea of the gap between understanding and experience. I wanted to mention about the rot specifically. It's caused by this alienage, which is a tiny microscopic alien creature like a bacterium that is causing this illness. So, and it is very much giving us the feel of like 12th century medieval Europe with the plague, right?
Yeah.
Everybody around him is dying. And back to your point about eugenics and the morality of this stuff, he, by nature of being Palatine and having Palatine blood, is immune to the effects of this disease.
And there's a sense in which, too, that there's a contradiction here a little bit, which is that there's an emphasis on experience here, which is I didn't understand until I witnessed. But there's also a sense in which maybe he doesn't truly understand because he can't experience alongside it. Because if you're truly immune to the effects of a plague? Can you truly experience, even if you don't get the plague, the anxiety of maybe catching the plague and maybe going down alongside everybody else? If you don't have that, there's a sense in which maybe you can't fully appreciate the experience, although you may be witnessing it up much closer than you would from your palace or something like that. There's maybe a small contradiction, although I think maybe not a deeply important one, although I'm sure if he expanded upon this view in front of one of the other people, they would very quickly say, well, you can't even catch the thing. So it's not really fair to say you understand.
No, but in comparison to the rest of the people in his class,
definitely,
he's giving us this indication that I'm not your normal, average, everyday Palatine. Like, I've been in the gutter. I've experienced this firsthand, whereas the Palatines would just write this off as, oh, that's a plebeian's problem, not ours. And so he's gaining some form of empathy here. As he has fitful nights of sleep, he dreams of his father's face. He dreams of these funerary masks again. He dreams of suffering in a Bastille, which is a state prison. Bastille Day is a day in France where the people stormed the Bastille as part of the French Revolution. He sees visions of his mother getting whipped, and it all harkens back to this idea that he wakes up in a cold sweat and feels so guilty about the fact that Gibson's sacrifice ended up being for nothing from his standpoint. He cannot let go the idea of, well, Gibson got exiled and brought to the brink of death for me to end up here. That sucks.
Yeah.
We get more mentions about this Sid Arthur myth and his quest for the Merlin tree. So the tree that the Buddha sat under for 49 days is mentioned here, but also it's like related to Merlin and potentially some, like, I don't know why, but Merlin tree gives me this sort of Yggdrasil type fountain of youth.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate it because to me, it's clearly a callback to the idea or the concept in Dune of the Zen Sunnis, right? Time has passed enough to where Zen Buddhism and Sunniism have mixed and created this sort of altered culture. That's the same thing that's happening here, but mixing Arthurian legend with Buddhism in this case is a really, really interesting mythological device.
It's a mix of legend, which is interesting in that it isn't just a mix of cultures. Like it's not like we're sharing. It's not we're sitting over a Tex-Mex meal, like we have like a meal that's just kind of a mix of a couple different cultures. This is like, it's gone so deep that the legends and the myths have been blended together in this way. So it's sort of a even deeper sense than regular amalgamations of cultures. It's gone so far as to blend all of the deeper grounding stuff like myth and legend together. It's quite interesting.
And it harkens back to the idea of Galstani, right? We mentioned many episodes ago in the beginning of our podcast how the script at the beginning of the book is vaguely Sanskrit-esque, right? So it's a merging of the concept of the British monarchy with the language that is vaguely South Asian too. So this is widespread, not only in the language that's being displayed on the page, but also in the myths and legends 10,000, 16,000 years later, or whatever, presumably even longer, because that's BC. So 20,000 years or something like that. It's crazy. He then mentions the fact that despite all this, he has to begin somewhere. And so he starts begging. He lives on the streets, and he mentions that even though he was tempted at the very beginning to go back to his old life and just to give it up, and go back to Delos, especially in those first few weeks, but he perseveres through that feeling. And in a lighter note, in comparison to the rest of the chapters that we read so far, he experiences some form of freedom. Like he had wished nothing more. I remember when he was on Delos and talking about the fact that like the plebeian is way more free than I am and all this different stuff. Well, now he's got true freedom. Like nothing is tethering him down and holding him. Like he is free from his station. He's free from everything else. But Hadrian is greedy, and he said it wasn't enough. And so that even though he was freer than he's ever been, he looks up at the stars at night and he dreams of traveling vast distances in space and still being this hero of myth and legend. And freedom isn't enough for him. He wants more and more and more. And he mentions the fact that at this moment, the stars are further away from him than they ever were before. Even when he was on Delos and trapped by his station, the idea of him leaving this planet at this point seems nigh on impossible. And despite the fact that he has this realization in these moments, he also mentions the fact that, okay, we've now transitioned into my physical needs being the most important thing. So rather than dreaming of anxiety about his father's face and funerary mass, he then starts dreaming about food. And that becomes food, shelter, water, become his primary things. And he has now hit the level of poverty where he has no idea where his next meal is coming from. He has no idea where he's going to sleep next. He's transient.
Yeah, he's trapped in a different way, right? Because he's trapped by station initially, and he's trapped by total lack of resources and opportunity now. So he's sort of experiencing the two extremes in the ways in which actually both kind of feel to be a kind of trap. You know, you can't simply remove station and attain freedom, and you can't simply try to go towards station to attain freedom. There's some sort of middle path that is necessary where you have enough to care for yourself, but not so much that you become bound by responsibility, or so to speak. And I think amidst this too, there's a suggestion here that he's tempted, especially in the first few weeks, to just give in and use his blood or his ring or something to find a way out of the situation and just give in. And he's very tempted to do this initially. And he mentions in this chapter that the years slipped by in squalor and the days were long. So we have some implication here that this is not a quick problem that is going to be solved. He tells us that he is stuck for an extended period of time. It's sort of undisclosed right now. And in the next chapter, we'll sort of jump back into kind of present time, what's kind of currently happening. But this is narrator telling us that this is not going to change anytime soon. And so he's sort of giving us almost a preface with this short chapter for what's to come and how much this section of his life sort of means to him. I read the first section of this chapter. That's half the chapter. Very short, but it's a very powerful chapter, actually. It's one of the standout chapters for me, actually, in recent reading. The language is great, but it also, in terms of the significance of this point in the story, really shows us where Hadrian is. It's like, we're going to be stuck at the bottom of the totem pole with very little way out, and there is a refusal to take the easy way out, although he wears it around his neck or on his finger, right? Speaks to his dedication to the path he wants to take, but also to the difficulty that the path is going to have for him.
And if we think broader meta, he does get off this planet.
We know that he does
at some point, but it seems impossible in the moment.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be interesting to see how he ascends from here and gets out of this situation, because it feels like rock bottom. And then we move on to chapter 25, Poverty and Punishment. In a rare moment of him actually finding food, Hadrian is eating some stolen eel inside of a storm drain. He mentions the fact, it's like, I started to thief, And going to the hierarchy that you mentioned of moral development.
Yes.
He has now descended into I got to feed myself.
Yes.
So even though it may not follow the 8 forms of obedience necessarily, when survival is on the line, morally it's not okay to steal, but stealing to survive, in this case, Hadrian has no qualms about it, because that's the only way he's been able to feed himself lately.
Right.
And he thinks, like, I'm pretty good at it. He has this, like, a happy moment. It's like, I stole some eel that had some barbecued eel that from this vendor on the street by the Colosso.
Yeah.
This storm drain that he is in is built into the side of the White District, which is this district that surrounds the base of the ziggurat upon which the Count's palace sits. So, like, this is the rich area of town, like looking out over the dregs, right?
Yes.
The small, the plebeians side of the place. We get some world building about how Imesh was taken from the Normans, who actually terraformed it. So there was a conflict between the Empire and the Normans, and the Empire ended up on top and now ruled. So he's still in the Empire. And as he mentioned votive lanterns that are going up for prayer in the previous chapter, talking about the rot, and he sees more votive lanterns floating up. And as he's looking out, some prefects like yell at him, say, "Hey, you." And he mentions the idea. It's like, there's always that weird thing where somebody says you and you immediately know that they're talking about you. I felt that in this moment. It says he'll come down or whatever. He's not supposed to be up there. It's not public. And he sort of like trips up as he's falling off, and this cooler gets knocked over, and the cooler has
Everything.
literally everything inside of it that he owns, with the exception of the ring, which is around his neck. So like imagine this small little igloo cooler has got like 2 magazines, a few coins that he's begged for,
And maybe a little food.
yeah, maybe a tiny bit of food, bottles with rainwater that he's trapped in there. Like everything that he owns can pack into this little cooler, and he accidentally trips over and spills it out, and it falls into the canal. And he's like, well, I guess I got to dive in. And he just immediately jumps in the canal after the cooler. Meanwhile, these prefects are shouting at him. He ends up finding it in the canal and gets out like soaking wet. He starts parkouring to try and like get away. And they catch him and they say, "Come with us." They ask him for papers, but clearly he doesn't have any. And then they try to bring him in. And again, when we've had visions of Gibson, it's been like him speaking Gibsonisms or in these kind of weird, strange Obi-Wan-esque moments. But now we're getting this vision of like Crispin in this unconscious state, which is an indication, if we know anything, is Hadrian about to smash? And Hadrian, if we remember what happened with Crispin, hit him in the head with a book. And so he takes this cooler and he tries to hit this guy in the head and runs, and then immediately gets shot with a stunner and falls on the ground.
It's like, and I think like as he hits him with the cooler, like all of his stuff like explodes everywhere. It's like, It's just like painful to feel like all of his things. And then he tries to run, he gets knocked out. It's pretty brutal. Yeah. It's kind of comical a little bit, but there is like a sense of desperation in it as well, where it's like, you finally feel like he finally clawed together this little cooler of stuff, and now it's just gone immediately after clawing it together. It's so frustrating.
It would be like if Aladdin at the very beginning of Aladdin, like immediately gets caught by the guards and beat up instead of like escaping or whatever. In that fun sequence with the song, it's like riff raff into the street rat, and and then just gets like clocked upside the head and gets knocked out. Yeah. They pat him down, and they can't find any of the papers. Luckily, because he's wearing the ring on his neck, they don't find it, which would be a dead giveaway on who he is. Mm-hmm. He spits out blood, but he doesn't have like faculties in his, like he was kind of grazed by the shot, but he clearly can't move particularly too well. And the woman brings him up and says, "Hey, do not do this again. Otherwise, next time it's going to be worse." And she drops him face first on the concrete. It's part of this too. They had like kicked him and beat him up for trying to get away. And in this vision that gave me much like a lot of the Good Samaritan vibes, like the people that walked by, the person who is stranded on the Jew who is stranded on the road. Mm-hmm. Nobody stops to help him at all. Nobody, even though he's poor along with these people, everybody just looks away as he is like laid out, splayed out on the street.
Yeah, and the comment that stood out to me at the end of this is that he's gutter trash. It's not even worth booking. Like, he's not even worth taking in over something like this, because he's just like so low in society. It's not even worth the bother. So he's left there. There's also a mention that it's been about a month since our encounter at the dock. As it mentions, we're not years ahead of time or anything like that. Mentioned, in the previous chapters that he'll spend a lot of time here on Amesh, but this is not that far. Like we're still within a month of when he first got here, so we're still kind of hanging out in the same timeline.
He's still getting his bearings.
Correct.
In terms, he's a little bit more used to this life, but it's still relatively new in the broader picture of his time in the gutter.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And that sort of ends chapter 25, and it brings us to the last chapter that we will discuss today.
Cat.
Chapter 26. Cat. So do you get the vibe that this is like immediately after these events? Because it seems kind of unclear.
I feel like more time has passed.
Yeah.
The feeling that I get is more that time has passed. There'll be some more context in this chapter later that suggests that more has happened since we last saw Hadrian. So my guess is that this is another event that occurred maybe in the near future, but is a little bit more distant than the event that just happened. That's my guess in terms of timeline.
Yeah, I had a hard time keeping up with the time. In keeping with the idea of the author doesn't know how to adequately display the timeline, I, as the reader, had a hard time keeping up with, okay, is this immediately after these events, or is it if time has passed? And it's pretty disorienting, some of the way that this is handled. But there's heavy rains that are going on in Borisivo at this point, and now he's searching for food and shelter. He's still in pain from the events of not too long back. We didn't get the indication that it was potentially from that situation or whatever, but he is in pain on the streets looking for a place to hang his head while the storm is going on. It's the middle of a hurricane force storm in Borisivo.
The description of this is unbelievable, by the way. I want to read this section. Out beyond the dark shapes of low buildings and the tiered sprawl of the city, a bolt of lightning struck the sea, turning all that darkness to gleaming glass. The thunder struck me to the marrow, rattled over Borisivo like the descent of starcraft. A striped awning snapped above my head, rain bouncing off it like the beat of 1,000 tiny drums. Driven by instinct, I curled myself up on the stoop and hoped to wait out the storm. From my vantage point, I could just make out the looming mass of the Palace Ziggurat rising over the city. Its black shape crouched over Borisivo like a dragon on its hoard. The light in its high towers flickered. Even the Count's power systems shivered in the wake of Amesh's fury. We had storms on Delos, blown into the Sirocco across the sea to our eastern shores, but they were nothing next to the storms on Amesh. Cloudscapes vast as empires towered over the city, filling skies and burying all the stars. Immensely powerful storm that he's in the middle of. This is sort of like another sense in which Amesh is just like brutal. I mean, it's a deeply brutal planet where, we get discussions of the fact that when the storms come like this, the people on the streets drown in the streets because of how intense they are. There's just this cruelty to the planet that's present, that is palpable, and creates a sense of desperation at the start of this chapter.
Amesh is clearly wild, way more wild than Delos.
Totally.
And dangerous. And not just dangerous for the low people, but also for the Palatines too. He mentioned specifically the fact that the Count's power systems flicker on and off during the midst of these storms.
Right.
We never got that indication on Delos. He mentions the fact that, we got storms on Delos, but they weren't that bad, and presumably nothing in the Palatine life. We just go inside, no big deal.
Yep.
But if the Count's palace is having power problems, you can only imagine how people less fortunate feel.
Yep.
They're having lived through multiple hurricanes and being from Houston. It's haunting and disconcerting for me that it sounds like this is a normal occurrence that happens year round in comparison to a hurricane season and getting hit once every few years. Imagine like living through a hurricane every month or so, like every few weeks.
It's wild.
You have this immense amount of rain. I mean, Hurricane Harvey in Houston wasn't as destructive in the passing of the hurricane, like the eye of the hurricane, like Ike was, where it just destroyed a lot and then it moved on. But the rain sat over the city for weeks, and that's what killed a lot of people is the amount of rain that it's getting flooded. And it sounds like they get rain like this a lot. And so a lot of people less fortunate in these squat low buildings that we get an image of are in danger constantly. But it's changed the way that they interact with it, right? Like when you live in situations like this, I mean, speaking from personal experience, everybody in a hurricane zone getting ready for hurricane season knows how to get ready for it. You go get your water, all your toilet paper, all that different stuff to prep, make sure that you're good to go. You board up your windows and things like that. And so he's searching for shelter, hoping that somebody's left the door open or some way that he could possibly access an abandoned building. But because these people deal with these conditions all the time, he mentions the fact that they're diligent. And so even though he tries to get off the stoop and find any other place, everything is boarded up, and he ends up just trying to lay down in an alleyway in this slightly elevated spot because he's too tired.
And, it's interesting you mentioned that, because if you took a person who didn't grow up in an area where there were hurricanes and then you plopped them in the middle of it, they may be completely unaware of what one would do to prepare for such a situation.
That's
right.
So
similarly, we have Hadrian, who is foreign to this environment. So he is, in all sense of the way that I interpret this, really completely caught off guard by just the intensity of the situation and frankly what to do in a situation like this where he is just sort of stuck on the street when the entire world is locking him out to try to fight off the storm. He's sort of stuck out here without a plan, basically.
Alone.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, and no access to any information
Right.
either.
Right.
So he has no idea what to do. And he's thinking to himself as he's laying down in this alleyway, you know, his childlike desires to be like Tor Simeon the Red and Karn Sagara and see flying among the stars, seeing the 99 wonders of the universe. He's starting to see the childishness in his desires because he says, well, I had gotten my adventure and it was killing me.
Yes. There's the start of this paragraph is, as a child, I had wished for adventure. And as he pontificates about it, he ends with that section. And I think that it's worth pausing there because I think, you know, in essence, Empire of Silence in some senses is a coming of age story. This stereotype, as I understand it, about coming of age is that you have some sort of naive principle or central identity characteristic of a growing up character that is confronted by a harsh truth about the world, and that confrontation leads to a growing up feeling. And I think this is almost the verbalization of this fact, is that he has desired adventure and he has been thrust into repeated danger and catastrophe at this point as a result of his desire for adventure. And so it's sort of the culmination of where we are in the book at this point. We've had a couple previous points of like the culmination of relationships. Now we're sort of coming to the culmination of his entire ethic thus far of just seeking adventure for adventure's sake without any regard for other things. So we'll have to see what Hadrian learns from this moving forward.
Echoing the consistent theme of the movement from adolescence into adulthood.
Yes.
He then starts thinking about, as he's laying in this alley, like, this, how could this have gone so, I did everything right. How could this possibly have gone so wrong with Dimitri? He mentions that it wasn't fair. And I hear that, and I immediately think back to the previous chapter when he said, my blood protected me from this rot. And I'm like, dude, the world is not fair. The fact that you are in a privilege, and I feel this too, because I have that sort of privileged, innate fairness that is it's really self-serving, if I'm being honest. The fact that he's in this situation and it not being fair. Yeah, that's the world, that's life, but also you're not infected with the rot, dude. I mean, you started from a way different spot. So the idea of you talking about fairness and doing everything right in the situation, and because your adventure, the way that you had imagined it, didn't play out, is a really privileged. It speaks to the idea that he still is, although he's in these dire straits, hasn't broken away from that ego.
Yes. There's a sense in which to feel the unfairness suggests that he feels he was entitled to the adventure that he sought, right?
Yes.
There's no unfairness present unless you think that you deserve it or are entitled to it. Because if you didn't believe that, you would just have gone out to the world and taken the world as it comes at you and not felt wronged by the world because the world doesn't owe you anything. But his impression, at least thus far at this age, is that it kind of does. I did all the right things, so I deserve this thing. And the truth is that no, you don't. And even amidst this, he still has advantages that are unfair. And he's more physically capable. He's immune to sickness that is destroying the population of the city. He's got all these advantages, and the thing that he feels most intensely in this moment, a hopeless moment, to be fair to him, he's probably not his perfect, most rational self here, is that it's just not fair,
Yeah.
But, maybe I would feel the same way.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. Right. But going on with that as well, I think it's beautiful that Mother Nature is the one that's oppressing him currently more than anything else.
Right.
And Mother Nature does not care about fairness. It harkens back to the idea of space and how it can be cruel and chaos. Mother Nature, in the same vein, is indiscriminate. Yes. And he's experiencing that in real time.
There's also this image in the middle of the scene of him clutching his ring. I'm trying to figure out, what I think about this. There's a sense in which it could be, sort of clinging to a hope or a sort of feeling but it also could be a sense of like temptation also. Just this sense of like, do I just like, I mean, this is maybe I just go tell him who I am at this point. I mean, this is getting too bad. So I actually don't know how to read it. Maybe it's a little bit of both. Maybe it's a grappling with the temptation of this. Maybe it's just a familiarity of just trying to grab onto something that feels familiar amidst this moment. I'm going to read it, but it's interesting nonetheless that he does it.
It's probably all of those things. And
Yeah.
he does it right before he starts thinking about his childlike
Yeah.
beliefs too.
Yeah.
So it's a harkening back of that. I made a note that like reminded me of Frodo.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, ring around the neck temptation a little bit. I mean, at a much lower scale in terms of
Yeah.
the potential impacts, but I got a little Frodo vibes from that.
Sure. Yeah.
So as he's in this alley and having these ponderous thoughts, he hears a small voice call out to him in the storm, asking him, "What are you doing?" And he looks up at the roof across from the building that he is sitting in, like, or next to in the alleyway. And he sees a woman who is looking down at him from this roof. And she asks again, like, "What are you doing? Get up here." This is the first person that's interacting with him in quite some time, because Hadrian mentions the idea that I hadn't had physical conversation with another human for quite some time, and I was like aghast and put back, like, in this moment of all moments, this is when I'm being talked to. It's almost like he wants to slink back into anonymity and go away, but he doesn't, and he doesn't want to interact with her, so he just ends up like staring up at her, and she's like, "Are you stupid or an idiot? There's no sand down there. Like, you'll be drowned and you'll end up in the lagoon by this morning. You need to get up here now." And so she motions to him to climb up this gutter. He gets part of the way up. She extends a small hand up to try and help him. She's not strong enough to pull him up, but she gives him enough time to essentially grab onto the ledge and then pull himself on top of this roof.
Yeah. I get the sense of like almost Hadrian can't even figure out how to get up himself. He's like fumbling over himself, he's struggling. And it's just this, not only are you caught out in the storm, but you can't even get up, right? There's a sense of befuddlement coming from whoever this person is, of like, it's like, you clearly do not know what's happening, because you're in this situation where you're going to die. And also you can't get up here. You're maneuvering like you have no idea what's going on. And that's why there's these insults that are like, are you actually a stupid person? Because you're doing everything you could possibly try to do at this point to get yourself killed without my help.
And he doesn't help himself because he hasn't talked to somebody in a while, and so he doesn't talk. And she calls him an idiot. It's like, "I'm not an idiot. No, I'm not." And then starts, like, he gets angry, and she immediately recoils. And then he takes a deep breath and calms himself and says, "Look, I'm sorry. Thank you for helping me up here." She can immediately tell from the moment that she starts talking to him that he's not from Imesh.
Yes.
And it's clear that she's in similar dire straits as he is, but she's more prepared. So she's ended up on top of this roof to try and escape the storm too, because she knows, and she had mentioned the fact that, "I know how high this water is going to get. You have to be way higher than that. Otherwise you're going to drown, and they're going to fish you out of the lagoon later." She asks if he is hurt. And then he's going back to the mention that you had earlier in the episode, talking about Hadrian's use of language. He begins using this Palatine language. He does not know that his language is confusing, and so he just goes to what he knows using his wonderful diction and his vocabulary.
Yes.
And it's confusing her clearly. But he mentions the fact that she's got a nice spot up on the roof. Like, he couldn't think of a better rain spot in this moment. And that gets her to smile, and it reveals the fact that she has crooked teeth. So that tells us a lot. Not only is she in dire straits in this moment, being out in the rain, but having a better streetwise sense than Hadrian is, she's clearly a plebeian because her teeth are crooked. But that doesn't give Hadrian the indication that I need to shift the way that I'm speaking to this person yet. She mentions the fact that she got lucky that the owners were gone, and then questions him, saying, "Why were you trying to get yourself killed down there? Like, are you not smart enough to understand the water was going to rise higher?" And he just mentions the fact that he was just trying to sleep. And she's visibly confused at this, because she can tell that he's from off-world and not from around here. And she just immediately assumes that every off-worlder that's on planet has money. And the fact that he doesn't is really, really confusing to her.
It's like this deep sense of, disorientation. I think that this character I think for the first extended experience, we had some experience a little bit earlier at the end of last episode with some people that were helping Hadrian, but this feels like the first extended experience of a person who grew up on this world, exists here, will probably always exist here, just like a regular person. This person could be in a fantasy book because this person doesn't interact with science fiction in the same way, other than just living on a different planet. And so we have a sense in which that this character is the first time we're getting to know a person in more detail that isn't Palatine-ish. It's a cool introduction to that for an extended period of time. So we get a sense of the classism from her perspective as someone who's lived it this way a long time. Oh, and she just sees off-worlders come and go through the port. They stay in the things. Why would there be an off-worlder in the alley about to drown? Like, doesn't even compute, doesn't make sense. So it's quite interesting to see this develop because of that. Then they start to share names, and Hadrian says, yeah, my name's Hadrian. She says, yeah, my name's Cat. Hadrian's like, oh,
she's like, what kind of name is Hadrian?
Well,
he's like, it's my name, an old name. Like, he's so pompous about it. He's like, Cat, is that short for Catherine? She's like, what the hell kind of name is Catherine? No, it's just Cat.
It's great. It's really endearing, actually. I love it.
I love it too, but he just doesn't come to this realization that his vocabulary is the way it is.
Yeah.
So they have this back and forth about names, and he ends up asking her why she is helping him. And she mentions that she would never leave anyone to drown in the street if she could help them.
Yeah.
So where we left off with the last chapter about everybody else on the street leaving him alone when he's stunned and bleeding and hurt and nobody helps him, in this immediate next scene, the moment of his most vulnerability where he's closest to death, this person who is in the dregs of society, an outcast, an outsider, is helping him.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't help but think of Good Samaritan. Right? This is very much a Good Samaritan-esque moment. The fact that she doesn't have a lot. She's in a similar situation on the street as him, but she's going to help whoever she can, and him in this case, because she just can't fathom the thought of somebody drowning.
You know,
she's a good, clearly by this, she's a good, the first objectively good person.
She's like a good person.
Maybe in the whole book.
There's a previous situation where he's saved off the street where we could construct maybe some positive stuff about those people that saved him, but there's a way to read that in which there's almost a exploitative kind of dynamic to it through the fact that they are expecting payment. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's not a pure, in a vacuum, just good thing to do in the same way that Kat does for Hadrian here. Like she did, she just helped him because she wanted to help him, not because there was any expectation of something coming in return or anything like that. She didn't want to see a person drown for no reason. There's a kindness present in this character that we haven't really seen in this world thus far. It's interesting that it comes in the form of a person of this class and of this experience in the story.
And of this age. She's like 16 years old.
16,
she's young. She is skinny. He can tell that she's malnourished like he is, right? She's not being fed a lot. She's thin, waifish, but has some round features in her face and things like that. She asks if he's hurt. He mentions that he has 2 cracked ribs, but he's had worse. But even he also thinks about the fact that, well, I have had worse on Maidwa, but then again, I don't have access to the same medicine that I had before. So he's wondering about that. But she can't do anything about his maladies either.
Right. And she asks, can you swim? She's curious. Yeah. What I love about it so much, it's making me smile and read it, is that she's curious like Hadrian. You know, she got this curiosity. Oh, can you swim? And he's like, yeah, I can swim. And she's like, oh, well, my mom said that some off-worlders ain't even got water on their planets. She's got this fascination to her of, she's really kind of taken aback about like the fact that Hadrian's interesting to her. She wants to learn more about him. There's a curiosity to just find fun in this character that she lives in this little planet. It's cruel and she's stuck there and she'll probably always be there, but she is curious about life out in the stars too, like what it's like to live elsewhere as well. It's really cool. Makes me smile thinking about.
Oh yeah, this interaction is wholesome for sure.
Yes.
As he's talking about the fact that he could swim and the way he does it, she mentions like, you really, really talk funny, and asks where he's from. And this throws Hadrian for a loop because this is the first realization that he's had that his vocabulary in the street and the words that he's using is completely divorced from the image that he is portraying to the world.
Yeah.
And so he is off-putting people because he's using these terms that they don't understand, talking higher than them. And it automatically makes everybody that he's interacted with, he sticks out like a broken finger, he says. It makes everyone interact with him in a way that is distrustful. Like he's not one of them. He's set apart. And so he files that away in his brain of, okay, maybe I need to think about doing this differently. And as she asks him more about where he's from, he says he's from Delos. And she's like, where's that? And he looks up at the stars and he's like, I have no idea where I am in the universe. And I don't know actually where it is, but my mother told me, I love this line, but the truth is poor poetry. My mother had taught me better. We'll talk about that in just 1 second. But he tells her a lie saying, you see that star right there? Like behind that star is another star far, far away. Like that's where my planet is. And she's in wonder at the idea of talking about this. But the fact that he mentions the truth is poor poetry, my mother had taught me better, is another indication that this story is potentially not true. That's a really subtle, like Hadrian's really good at making us feel like he's really honest. And I do feel like the whole first read through, I felt super, super in line with what Hadrian's view of the world is. Mm-hmm. But now that we're taking this with a fine-tooth comb, the indications that we've had about memory, the indications that we've had about the picture versus the photograph, his vision of Crispin as a character, and now he's telling us on the page, but the truth is poor poetry, my mother had taught me better. It's just it snuck in this context of him like pointing out to this 16-year-old girl where his home planet is when it's really not there. But there's a larger potential indication of the fact that like when he talks about this flowery language and all this different stuff, he may be obfuscating from the truth of the situation.
It could be. And it's interesting because, you know, a lot of the time I get the sense that insofar as there are mistakes or imperfections, especially with like the portrayal of Crispin, for example, there's a subtlety to it in which it feels more that it's a consequence of his bias rather than a pure lie or something like that, right? It feels tweaked because of that. But then you also get these other indications sometimes where, you know, he just says something like, if there was someone that you were just meeting and they told you this, you'd be like, I'm taking your stories with skepticism. Not because I know that you've lied to me, but because you just said that. And so there's a sense in which, you know, the jury is still kind of out in terms of the trustworthiness of the story. We know that there's a bias built in this story, certainly, because we've seen it on the page.
But he's admitted that.
Right, totally. But, you know, he's also said something like, you know, the truth is it's more than just the memory.
Imperfect, more perfect. Yeah. Like
right.
This is just another tally for us to put in our ledger, in our brains.
Yeah.
Of the idea that this story, we need to keep an eye out for when he's potentially obfuscated. Mm-hmm. She asks what Delos is like, and he's like, no, now it's my turn to ask a question. And he tries to sit up, and he can't because he's in so much pain. And then he asks if she's got any painkillers and like any drugs or anything like that. And she's like, I don't understand the words that you're saying. Pills, anything like that. She asks how he got so hurt to begin with. And he mentions stealing food or stealing shoes off the back of a lift pallet from people with white armbands. We don't see that on the page. Right.
Right.
So there's a different event that has happened in between the end of last chapter and this one.
So this tells us
group called the Rels.
Yeah.
He's trying to steal from them.
Well, it tells us really clearly that time has passed. This is the event I was referring to earlier, that we're not told there's a time jump, but clearly there was a time jump of some kind, because he's not only been beat up in the last chapter, he's presumably recovered enough to go get in more trouble and beat up again more seriously this time because he crossed with lines with the Rels, whoever the hell the Rels are, right? So it's an indication that he's been kind of moving about. Presumably this is a more serious attempt at something larger. There's a sense of desperation for the want of just shoes. He's wanting something bigger than just enough to eat. He wants to be able to have shoes again. Pretty drastic contrast to where we were previously in the story. But yeah, time's passed, really, because he's gotten into more trouble.
And this has led to him like breaking 2 ribs, right?
Yes.
Cat says, you're crazy, dude, for trying to do that.
Yeah.
He's like, all I wanted was shoes. And then he just passes out.
Yes.
And then he awakes to this really pristine, still moment where all the clouds in the sky are gone. So this hurricane has passed over. He's in that same spot beneath these solar panels on top of this building. Cat is gone, and he lays a long time not moving there, probably because it's painful and difficult to move.
Yeah.
But she returns, and she's like, oh, you're not dead. and then it drops this bag next to him that jingles and jangles and asks if this is the stuff that he's asking for. He starts digging through it, and it's half-empty medicine bottles in a bunch of different languages. And so he's like, oh, this one's in Mandari, but I can't really read that one. And he digs through them all and finds one that's in Lothrian, like the familiar language of Lothrian, the blocky letters. And he finds naproxen. Naproxen is a leave. They also do like prescription strength naproxen for anti-inflammatory, but it's an anti-inflammatory drug that's non-steroidal. He pops 3 Aleve, just different according. He mentions the fact that like I didn't care about the label and what it says. Just little human things that like some of us do sometimes too. It makes him more human. It's like, I'm in a lot of pain. I'm gonna take 3 instead of 2. It can't hurt me that bad or whatever. Have you ever done that?
I am such a strict jerk of a rule follower that I don't. But like,
me too.
My wife will be like, stuff up. It's like read the instructions. I'm like doing the weird peel back labels that made like that are just awful. So I'm doing the whole thing. But I think your average person just kind of like, I'm taking 3 Advils instead of 2. I'm feeling bad, but I tend not to because I'm a little bit of a rule follower.
I will say the same for me, but I can imagine if I was in the same situation, that goes away pretty quick.
If you got 2 cracked ribs, I don't know if anybody's experienced this before. Just for reference, it hurts to breathe if you break your rib. I mean, it's just very painful. I one time double-legged a guy in wrestling in high school and cracked one of his ribs, and he was recovering for like 6 months because of. I mean, it was not good. Yeah, so it's a serious injury that's not straightforwardly fixable. It's very painful.
Yeah. He asks where she had gotten all this medicine. She mentions that she found it in the garbage, like in the trash. He asks if it's okay for him to take the pills. She said yes. After he takes them, he's trying to strip off his wet shirt, but it's painful because of the ribs. And as he's doing this, he takes the ring off his neck and like stuffs it in the pocket. So even though that this woman has done everything for him up to this point, clearly Hadrian doesn't trust her enough to let her know who he actually is. And still is skeptical.
Yeah.
He looks down in the alley and sees that it's filled with 2 feet of water and realizes, I would have drowned. Like how tired I was, if I would have fallen asleep, I probably was not going to get up before I was drowning. And he asks her again, why did you help me? And she said, I already told you. Like, I'm not going to let somebody be in that situation. It's so beautiful. Hadrian is searching for an ulterior motive within this woman, and he cannot find it. She's being honest. She's the most genuine person that we've met in the story so far. Despite her circumstances, is genuinely trying to help somebody else out when they're in need.
Yep.
Right? More than she needs to. She didn't need to go get him that medicine.
Right.
She didn't need to she could have let him die on the street and it would have thought nothing of it or whatever. A lot of people would do that. She goes out of her way to really help this guy. And presumably to go get all this stuff, she had to scramble off of the thing while they're still flooding water. And so it's presumably kind of dangerous, her leaving the situation or whatever to try and help him out. But she's wanting to help him just for the sake of helping him.
And because she noticed that he was crying, and she says that she knows what that's like being alone.
Yeah.
There's a connection she experienced with, this is roughly empathy, this sense of connection. Empathy may be slightly different than that, but it's just this feeling for Hadrian, she feels this desperation, and he asks about her mom that she had mentioned, and she explains to him that she lost her mom to the rot. So she relates to the feeling of being alone right now because of her situation. And then she asks him if he has family, and he says no, which is interesting for a couple of reasons. I've read this in a couple of ways. Number one, it's a sense in which he's deeply estranged from his family. So in some metaphorical sense, maybe no is a apt answer, but it's also a lie at the same time, in the same way that putting the ring in his pocket is a lie. There's a sense in which it's hiding a part of himself maybe at the same time. Do you get the same sense?
Yeah, at the surface level and in the most cynical view, yes, it is. I don't trust this person enough to let them know who I really am.
Yeah.
Because maybe they'll treat me different.
Mm-hmm.
There's layers to this too, because maybe in Hadrian's mind at this point, he has no family.
Right.
He worries for his mother, but that's the only person in his family that he has a connection to at this point. He's ended the relationship with Crispin. His father ended the relationship with him and Gibson. Gibson's gone. And so he kind of doesn't have a family anymore, and he doesn't know how long it's been. So Presumably his
Who
mom
knows?
could have died at this point.
Yeah.
So maybe he's also taking that as like the onus of like, I am stepping away from the family.
Yeah.
And he also, at the end of our time on Delos, mentions the coldness of the Palatine family and all this different stuff. Maybe he's decrying that as well. So there's a bunch of different layers that this could be. But
right.
The most important that you mentioned is probably up top of, I don't trust this woman enough.
It's a lot at once with one word, because, you know, I felt initially it was just a recognition of the fact that he doesn't have a family in a metaphorical sense. You know, if they're still alive, they're unsupportive, and especially now, given what's happened thus far. So there's like 6 things going on with this one word. It's carries a lot. On its face, it's dishonest, although maybe he feels like it's true in some metaphorical sense as well. And that's the end of the chapter. Now that's where we leave off with Hadrian alongside this newfound, also alone and yet helpful and caring person, Cat.
Yeah, Cat is the best. I mean,
Cat's great. I really appreciated this chapter a lot on a second read, in a way that I think I didn't appreciate it the first time through.
So despite his circumstances, his light is coming through in his darkest moment in the form of Cat in this case. And so I'm excited to see where he goes from here. But we only have one direction that we can go, Drew. And as we say every episode, thanks for joining us. Always forward.
And always down.
And we will see you next time.
See you, folks.
Cheers. Devil's Rest Book Club is Cameron Elston and Drew Welty. Today's episode discussed chapters 23, 24, 25, and 26 of Empire of Silence by Christopher Rocchio, copyright 2018. Empire of Silence was originally published by Daw Books on July 3rd, 2018. Quality editing and original music by Cameron Elston. Find us on YouTube. Contact us at devilsrestbookclub@gmail.com. Devil's Rest Book Club is a production of Disquiet Pods. This episode, copyright 2025, Cameron Elston and Drew Welty. Thanks for joining us, and remember, rage is blindness.